topic is the different ways to represent multiplication. The essential question is, what are some symbols or ways to represent multiplication? And how can the distributive property help simplify? So since we're talking about multiplication, I want to go ahead and show you this little, I call it a tic-tac-toe chart just because it reminds me of tic-tac-toe. And this simply helps you remember if your answer is going to be positive or negative when you're multiplying positive and negative numbers. So when you create this little tic-tac-toe chart, you start with your standard little tic-tac-toe board, and then you have a plus, plus, plus going down to the right diagonally like that. And then you'll fill the rest of it in with minuses or negatives. Okay? And the way to read this for multiplication is going from left to right. So for example, if you have a positive number multiplied by a negative number, then your product would be a negative answer. If you had a negative number written first and then a positive number written second and you're multiplying them, your answer will be a negative product. And then if your first factor is negative multiplied by your second factor, which would also be negative, you would end up with a positive product as your answer. Okay? So you'll see these symbols right here. This one right here is the first standard one you've probably seen since you learned about multiplication. And when you see that, this is what it means to multiply. 5 times negative 4. And you have a positive times a negative. So looking over here, here's a positive times a negative. I'm going to have a negative product as my answer. So I'll have negative 20 as my answer. Okay? And this is what it would look like as repeated addition or subtraction. Because I hope you know by now that multiplication is just repeated addition or repeated subtraction. So this means add 5 groups of negative 4. Okay? So here's a negative 4, one of them, plus here's another group of negative 4, there's 2 of them, plus here's another group of negative 4, there's 3 of them, plus here's another group of negative 4, that's 4 of them, plus the 5th group of negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you add all those together, negative 4 plus a negative 4 plus a negative 4 plus a negative 4 plus a negative 4, you would get a negative 20 as your answer. Sorry, I got kind of cut off right there, but you'll see we have the same answer right there, okay? Another way that you'll see multiplication represented is with just a dot like that, okay? And this time around I have the problem negative 5 times 4 and a negative times a positive would give you, let's check. See, is this a negative times a positive? Nope. This row right here, negative times a positive will give you a negative product. So I know that the answer is going to be negative, and you know, a positive 5 times a positive 4 would be a positive 20, but we have a negative 5 times a positive 4, and that's going to give us a negative 20. And this would mean you're going to subtract 5 groups of 4, okay? So I'm going to subtract, here's your group of 4, subtract, here's another group of 4, subtract 4, subtract 4, subtract 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 of them. And think about where you're at on the number line. You can go to the left 4, and then left 4 more, and then 4 more to the left, 4 more to the left, 4 more to the left, placing you 20 units to the left of 0, which would be negative 20. All right, here's another way that you're going to see multiplication represented, and you may not have seen this before. When you have a number directly next to a variable, notice how I put this in capital letters, directly next to a variable. Number directly next to a variable, like what you see here. Here's a number directly next to a variable. This means multiply, okay? The number in front of the variable, that's called a coefficient. That just tells you how many times to add x to itself, or whatever variable you're talking about. So this is what it would look like as repeated addition or subtraction, but in this case it'd be addition, repeated addition. It's going to be adding 4 groups of x. It's x plus x plus x plus x. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So here's one x right there. There's another x. So those two right there would be 2 x's. Plus another x would give me 3 x's. Plus another x are 4 x's. So that's how they come up with the 4x, okay? This one right here, your coefficient is -3. -3 times p. So you're going to subtract 3 groups of p. Subtract p, subtract p, subtract p, okay? So there's a negative p right there, and another negative p right there, so you got 2 negative p's. Then there's another negative p right there, so you have 3 negative p's. Okay, see how that's related right there? All right, another way that you're going to see multiplication represented is with a number directly next to parentheses. And again, you see the words directly next to. See that directly next? That's all in capital letters because that's super important. Look how it's smushed right next to it like that. There's no symbol or anything in between it. It's just right next to those parentheses, okay? That means multiply. 3 times 6. Well, 3 times 6, that's 18. So this is what it would look like as repeated addition. And it would be add 3 groups of 6. Okay, 6 plus 6 is 12, plus 6 more gives you 18, which is exactly what we got right there. This next example, okay, again, you see a number directly next to parentheses. You're going to multiply that. Something that helps me to remember to multiply when I see a number directly outside parentheses is I like to draw an arrow to say, hey, -2 times -7. And in case you forgot, well, let's pretend they're positive. 2 times 7, that's 14. But we got a -2 times a -7, and if you're unsure about what your product would be, whether it'd be positive or negative, you can look back up at your multiplication chart up here, the Tic-Tac-Toe Chart. Got a negative times a negative. Nope, not that row. Nope. This one right here, negative times a negative gives me a positive product. So -2 times -7 gives me a positive 14. So what this would look like when you write it out, it may look a little bit complex at first. You're going to subtract 2 groups of -7. Subtract a group of -7, there's one of them. You subtract a group of -7, there's your second one, okay? And I'm going to come back to this one in just a few moments after I go through the rest of this, because then once I show you this last bottom part, it might make a little bit more sense. But anyway, we would end up with 14, and I'll show you momentarily how the heck we got that, okay? Okay, here's another example. You have 2 times the quantity of 6 plus 3. That's how you say it out loud. Don't say 2 parentheses 6 plus 3, because mathematically, that's just not accurate. You want to say 2 times the quantity of 6 plus 3, because there's a quantity that's going on in there, okay? And again, I like to use those that arrow to help me remember to multiply. Up here, I probably could have done it too, so yeah. So anyway, right here, I would need to go 2 times 6, that's 12. See how it's a positive 2 times a positive 6? Positive 12. Positive 2 times this positive 3 is a positive 6. So 12 plus 6 is equal to 18. You just did the distributive property. You multiplied by everything inside that parentheses. Nice job. Okay, here's what it would look like as repeated addition. Okay, so I'm going to add 2 groups of 6 plus 3. So here's a group of 6 plus 3. And here's a group of 6 plus 3. And then 6 plus 3, that's 9. Plus, here's my 6 plus 3 right there, and that equals 9. So 9 plus 9 is equal to 18. All right, this last problem in this little section right here that's describing a number next to parentheses, meaning multiplication, is -2 times the quantity of 4 plus 1. So here's what you do. Again, I'm just going to draw those arrows simply because it helps myself remember it. That's my preference. So look, I have a negative times a positive. -2 times positive 4. So let's see, this column, negative times positive gives me a negative answer. And go back down here. -2 times positive 8, sorry, -2 times a positive 4 is a -8. Okay, and then a -2 times a positive 1 gives me a -2. Okay, So think about where you're at on the number line. You're -8, your 8 spaces, 8 units to the left of 0. Then you're going to go to the left 2 more units, placing you at -10. Okay, and when we would write this all out, we would subtract 2 groups of 4 plus 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 group of 4 plus 1. Then I'm going to subtract that second group of 4 plus 1. Okay? So, 4 plus 1, well, that's 5. And then we got that negative, bringing it down. Then 4 plus 1 is 5, and then bring down that negative right there. So think of where you're at on the number line. You're 5 units to the left of 0 right now. Now you're going to go 5 more units to the left, placing you at -10. Okay? All right, this last way that I'm going to show you that represents multiplication is if there's a positive symbol or a negative symbol directly next to the parentheses. That means multiply, okay? So if you see like a plus right here, right outside a quantity, a parentheses with a quantity inside, you need to multiply that positive symbol by everything inside that parentheses, okay? That's the distributive property. So let me go ahead and show you what that would look like. And I'm going to draw my arrows because that helps me. Positive times a positive 4, that gives me positive 4. Then I have a positive times a -3. What's a positive times a negative? Positive times a negative gives you a negative. So I'm going to write positive times a -3 is a -3. Okay? So think about where you're at on the number line. You're 4 units to the right of 0, because that's a positive 4. And then you're going to go to the left 3 units, placing you at 1. Okay. Now, here's what this would look like as, written out. It would just simply look like this. Positive 4 minus 3. Okay. So 4 minus 3 is 1. And plus outside there. So it's just a positive 1. Okay. Now the next problem. Again, I'm going to use my arrows to remind myself, hey, use the distributive property, multiply that outside symbol by everything inside that parentheses. So I have a negative times a positive 7. So a negative times a positive gives you a negative product. So negative times a positive 7 gives me a -7. And now I got to go a negative times a -5. Negative times a negative. Go ahead and check up at your Tic-Tac-Toe chart to see what that would give you. A negative times a negative gives you a positive 5. So think about where you're at on the number line. You're 7, with a -7, you're 7 units to the left of 0. And now you're going to go to the right 5 units. Can you picture that? That would place you at -2. Okay, go ahead and rewrite that out over here. Okay, so I have 7 minus 5. 7 minus 5 is 2. Put that negative out there. Negative times a positive 2 gives me -2. Okay, so now for this part right here, I'm going to go ahead and draw the the arrows to show multiplication, to remind myself. So a negative times a positive 6. A negative times positive gives you a negative. So it's a -6 right there. Then we have a negative times a positive 9. Negative times a positive 9 gives you a -9 or a -9. Okay, and I want you to think about where you're at on the number line, okay? So you're 6 units to the left of 0. Now you're going to go to the left 9 more units, placing you further to the left, and that would be at -15. Okay, I'll go ahead and rewrite that out. Okay, and what we got going on here, 6 plus 9, that's 15. Bring down your negative, and then negative times that positive gives you a -15. Okay, All right, here's something that you're going to see quite often, I'm sure. When you just got, you know, how all these had like an operation in there, like a quantity in there that you had to figure out. Right here, I just have a plain old -2. So same thing applies. A negative times a negative would give you a positive. So negative times a -2 gives you a +2. Okay? So I'm going to write that over here. So you got, even if you don't see the parentheses, if you see something like this, like that, that right there also means +2 because you have a negative right next to a negative, which turns into a +2. Okay? So again, if you see this situation right here, multiply it, negative times a negative gives you a positive, giving you a +2. If you see something that looks like this, a negative right next to a negative like that, you're going to multiply it, negative times a -2 gives you a +2, okay? Now I'm going to relate this back up to this problem up here that I told you I would come back to. So now that I've explained what to do when you see a positive or negative symbol right directly outside the parentheses, hopefully you'll know what to do here. See this negative times this negative right there, so negative times a -7 gives you a +7. Then right here you see a negative times a -7. Negative times a negative gives you a positive, so it would be +7. 7 plus 7 gives you 14, which is exactly what we got up there. Okay? So for your summary, go ahead and draw that little tic-tac-toe chart right here just from memory, okay? And then when you have it drawn, check back up in that column to see if you drew it out correctly. Remember, it's the rows that you'd want to use for multiplication, okay? So this times this would give you the symbol for your product. This times this would give you the symbol for your product. This times this would give me the symbol for your product, if it's positive or negative. Okay. When you multiply a single term with 2 or more terms that are inside a set of parentheses, that's called the distributive property. So you'd be using the distributive property when you multiplied that single term, that outside number or symbol that's sitting outside the parentheses, by everything inside the parentheses, like we did on the front page on a couple of examples. Okay, distributive property. All right, so we have a couple of examples up here, down here, and I've already highlighted them just to kind of show you the to distinguish the difference between those examples, okay? And the directions say show 3 ways to simplify each expression. So right here we have our first expression, 4 times a quantity of 2 plus 1. And up in this highlighted section right here in purple, I want you to write that out so you know how to properly say it, okay? So you'd write 4 times the quantity of 2 plus 1. All right, now we've got to show 3 ways to simplify this expression. So the 3 ways I'm going to show you how to do this is starting inside the parentheses, adding 4 groups of 2 plus 1, and then using the distributive property, okay? So let's go ahead and start inside the parentheses. So right here inside the parentheses, you know, like in the order of operations where they say the grouping symbols go first, I see right here I have 2 plus 1, which is 3. And from there, I don't see any exponents, but then we'd multiply and divide from left to right. And we know that when you have a number right outside parentheses like that, that means to multiply. So it's really 4 times 3, which would give you 12. All right, so we're done with that problem. Now, another way to show how to simplify this expression is by adding 4 groups of 2 plus 1. So this is going to take some writing. Okay, here's a group, 2 plus 1 plus a group of 2 plus 1. There's my second group, plus a group of 2 plus 1. There's my third group, plus a group of 2 plus 1. And there's, what, 4 groups? All right, so 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 plus 1 is 3, and you're adding them all together because this is a positive. So 3 plus 3 is 6, plus another 6 right there gives you 12. Same exact answer. Okay, the third way is using the distributive property. So I'm going to rewrite the problem right here. 4 times the quantity of 2 plus 1. And remember, I like to use those arrows to help me remember to distribute that 4 through, meaning multiply that 4 by everything inside of those parentheses, because that's using the distributive property. Positive 4 times a positive 2. Let me write that out so it's a little bit more broken down for you. I'd go 4 times 2, and then I would need to go 4 plus 4 times that 1 right there. Okay, so I want 4 times 2 to do this, 4 times a positive 1 to do this. Now from there, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 4 times 1 is 4. 8 plus 4 equals 12. Okay. For the next example, let's go ahead and write it out. You have negative 3 times the quantity of 2 plus 5 plus 1. You'll see that there's actually 3 numbers inside right here that we got to distribute that negative 3 through. Like multiply that negative 3 by everything inside those parentheses. Okay? So let's write it out correctly. So it's negative 3 times the quantity. I'm going to abbreviate quantity like that. That means quantity of 2 plus 5 plus 1. Okay. Now let's go ahead and start inside the parentheses for this first little box right here. 2 plus 5 is 7, plus 1 more is 8. So I'm going to just show that I've simplified that. Simplifying means when you take all that junk and just simplify it so it looks more simple looking. We still have that negative 3 right outside there, and you see we have a number directly outside parentheses, and so we're just going to multiply it because that's what you're supposed to do. Negative 3 times a positive 8. Well, a negative times a positive gives me a negative answer. So I just got to think in my head, okay, what was 3 plus 8, or 3 times 8? That's 24. But in this case, it's a negative 24 because it's a negative 3 times a positive 8. So we get negative 24 as our answer. Okay. Now we're going to subtract 3 groups of 2 plus 5 plus 1. The reason I'm subtracting 3 groups is because there's that minus sign or that negative sign right out here, okay? In this case up here, we had added 4 groups of 2 plus 1 because that's a positive 4. See the difference? So right here, I'm going to subtract those 3 groups of this. Subtract this group of 2 plus 5 plus 1. There's a group right there. Subtract 2 plus 5 plus 1. There's a group right there. And I'm going to subtract 2 plus 5 plus 1. There's my next group, okay? So parentheses, I can kind of imagine parentheses around there to separate my groups. 2 plus 5 is 7. 7 plus 1 is 8. So it's really minus 8. Okay? And then 2 plus 5 plus 1 is 8, but we got to minus that 8. 2 plus 5 plus 1 is 8. We got to minus that 8. So think about where you're at on the number line. Think of where you're, okay, think of 0 on the number line. You're going to be 8 units to the left of 0. Then you're going to go left more, 8 more units, so you're at negative 16. From there, you can go to the left 8 more units, placing you at negative 24. You'd be 24 units to the left of 0. Let's go ahead and use the distributive property. Again, I'm going to use those arrows. Negative 3 times a positive 2, because there's no negative in front of the 2. So negative times a positive gives me a negative 6, because negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6. And then we got negative 3 times a positive 5 is a negative 15. And then I got a negative 3 times this positive 1 gives me a negative 3. You'll notice that I circled it here, and I within the circle, I included the symbol in front of it. That helps you recognize what your product will be. See how it was -3 times a +2 gives you a -6. -3 times a +5 gives you a -15. -3 times a +1 gives you a -3. Okay? So go ahead and simplify that. Think where you're on the number line. -6 to the left of 0. And then, you're at the left of the 0, 6 units. Then you go to the left more, 15 more units, placing you at -21. Then you can go to the left 3 more units, placing you at -24. Okay, you'd be 24 units to the left of 0, which gives you the negative. Okay? The third example, 2 times the quantity of 6 plus 4 minus 3. I'm going to abbreviate quantity again, QTY, of 6 plus 4 minus 3. Okay, let's go ahead and try those 3 ways, but this time I want you to do it yourself. I'm going to be checking this, so I want you to start inside the parentheses, model that. If you have any trouble, you can look above at the top 2 examples up there. Then I want you to do the second way to simplify, adding 2 groups of 6 plus 4 minus 3. If you have any trouble, look at the top 2 examples. And then the third way, I want you to simplify it using the distributive property. Okay, and again, look at the top 2 examples up there if you have any trouble. Okay, we'll be checking those. Okay, this last part in the summary, I'm going to help you with that. Okay, you're doing this one by yourself, but I'm going to provide support for it here because what if there's a variable? So what if you come across a problem that looks like this? 4 times the quantity of 3 minus 2 times x. Okay, this is what you got to do. You know how I have the 3 different ways like I've illustrated up here? Starting inside the parentheses. So let's go ahead and examine this right here. 3 minus 2x. I want to let you know right now, you see how that right there, that minus 2 has an x attached to it, and then this 3 right there has no x with it. When you see something like that, that's called unlike terms. Those are not like terms. We cannot simplify it because we do not know the value of x. So I can't just go 3 minus 2x, oh, that's a number. We don't know what the number is simply because we don't know what this 2 is being multiplied by. We don't know that number. So in this case, we can't start with inside the parentheses because those are not like terms. And we'll go into more detail about like terms later on, okay? So for now, you're just going to skip that because we can't do that. And you'll find once you learn more that we really can't do that, okay? You are able to add 4 groups of 3 minus 2x, okay? See, this means adding 4 groups of this quantity. So let me go ahead and show you that, okay? Write this down. So 3 minus 2x. Okay, there's a group of it right there. I'm going to add because that was a positive 4. 3 minus 2x, there's my second group. I should write smaller. Plus 3 minus 2x, there's my second group. Plus 3 minus 2x, there's that fourth group, okay? And like I said, we cannot add those because those are not like terms, or we can't subtract those because they're not like terms. We can't combine them because we don't know the value of x. But here's the cool part that you are able to do, okay? All the ones that are like terms, you can combine them. They have to have the exact same ending, okay? So here's what I mean by that. See how this little guy, this term ends in x? You want to circle a symbol in front of it, like this, so negative 2x. Well, look, this little guy over here also has an x at the end. So you get another negative 2x, and a negative 2x, and another negative 2x, okay? And then all the other ones are positive 3's. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle around those in a different color. There's a positive 3, positive 3, positive 3, and positive 3. Okay? So let's go ahead and add what we can that are like terms. What's 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3? Well, that's a positive 12. Okay? Now think of this one. What's a negative 2x plus a negative 2x plus a negative 2x plus a negative 2x? If that's confusing to you right now, think of negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2. So 2 to the left of 0 is where you're starting, and then you go to the left 2 more, then the left 2 more, then the left 2 more, placing you at negative 8, but don't forget that x. So negative 8x. Okay? And that's hard to see, so I'll trace over it for you. So that's one way to write this, or you can write that negative 8x first, and then that positive 12. Same exact thing, okay? Notice how we kept the sign in front of it. Yeah, it was a negative 8x here, still negative 8x there. Now this is a positive 12 and still a positive 12. Okay, now the third way, using the distributive property. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that problem right there. 4 times the quantity of 3 minus 2 times x. Okay, remember, distributive property, I have a number directly outside the parentheses, and that means multiply this outside number by everything inside the parentheses. Positive 4 times a positive 3 gives you a positive 12, and I don't have to put the positive in front of it, but just know it's positive 12. And then I got this positive 4, oh, I'm going to do this whole thing, times that negative 2x. So a positive times a negative gives me a negative, and what would be like 4 times 2? That's 8. So a positive 4 times a negative 2 gives me a negative 8, but don't forget that x. Okay? And again, you are able to rewrite this problem. Just keep the symbols directly in front of those terms. So yeah, this was an 8x, but a negative in front of it. Keep that negative or that minus directly in front of it. And see how this is just a positive 12 because there's no negative in front of it, so we assume it's just a positive 12. And we're right in that assumption. Boom, there we go. Okay? All right, again, finish this up right here. And let me know if you have any questions. Bye.